Welcome to Writers Read. Welcome back to Writers Read. I just love saying welcome back because it means we've been together before. And we have two readers today, Bob Corwin and Lou Templeton, but before they read, you know the routine. Here we go. I say a line and you say a line. Right, right, right.
Right, right, right.
Until you get it right.
Until you get it right.
Then read aloud.
Then read aloud.
You'll draw a crowd.
Draw a crowd.
And bring us great delight.
And bring us great delight.
Paul's poem always starts our session. So, Bob, welcome, welcome. And I want to start out with mentioning the Writers Read book that is in our library on the windowsill, and a lot of readers and writers have hard copies of what they're reading. And the people, I'm just going to tell you who's in this volume. This is Ina Bray, George Counts, Peggy Johnson, Paul Niebanck, Lou Templeton, Audrey Whitecamp, Nancy Wiesner, Cassandra Carruthers, Mary Piet, Gussie Howe, and Grace Popoff. So this says spring and fall of 2021, so we need to change the numbers because I think we'll just add, for instance, what Lou reads today. She can give me a hard copy to put in this notebook. So look forward to checking it out and reading. Okay, and this week I asked the writers if they had a favorite writer. And so, Bob, what you can name more than one. I was thinking if I had to answer that question, I would have more than one. But do you have a favorite writer?
I have favorite writers every week. and this week I would say my favorites are Toni Morrison and William Faulkner. And as you might hear, I'm convinced, like many of us, that race is really the central issue of our country and has been and will be. Anyway, those two writers have a way of, I guess you call it stream of consciousness, ways of sort of touching on the subconscious and collective unconscious, whatever you call it, things that we don't always surface in our conscious and don't talk about directly, but can. Anyway, I think they're both brilliant at bringing us into that.
Oh, thank you for mentioning them. And I'm looking forward to your writing today, Bob.
I'm looking forward to reading it.
You could. You've brought us so many rich stories so far. And
well, I'm still mining the family history, and as you recall, I inherited piles of documents from my father's New Haven family, and I've been kind of sifting those. Lots of diaries and letters going back over 200 years, and so this is in the middle of that saga, and this particular chapter is the 3 years preceding the Civil War in this family household in New Haven. And the chapter is called "Who Will Lead Us Now?" And there's 4 sections. The first section is called Leonard's Church. Shouts and musket fire rattled up from the harbor. Now in 1858, when he passed this way, the center of the green, the sounds returned, imbibed from veterans' tales of 1779. The militia had mustered here to defend the town. Survivors were at his first service in 1825, inaugural of his career. The porticoed temple of Center Church was just 10 years built to be Connecticut's most prestigious. When the war broke out, New Haven sent 3 companies to Washington's army, with more enlisted later. This major port was a British target, and New Haven formed new companies of militia from remaining householders and Yale students. When night fell on July 4th, 1779, a cannon boomed and the signal fire on Beacon Hill was alight. 2 British men of war with more than 40 smaller vessels had come to anchor in New Haven Harbor. After a sleepless night, rebel soldiers mustered on the green and deployed to face invasion at both East and West Haven. Thousands of British soldiers and Marines overwhelmed stiff resistance. By day's end, the town was in enemy hands. What might have been destruction of the town and harbor left New Haven lightly touched. The town had lost 23 lives, 11 houses, 9 barns, and a warehouse were burned. General Garth looked out from the top of the house of Admiral Foote for a bird's eye view and declared it was too pretty a town to burn. The port's busy trade with the West Indies included a wealth of rum in warehouses discovered by His Majesty's troops, leaving them useless after a jubilant night. General Garth was embarrassed and disheartened, and the night's celebration favored his decision to evacuate and spare the town. Some loyalist gentlemen hosted a healing banquet that evening for British officers. New Haven slept peacefully and rested for a bon voyage to His Majesty's squadron when it weighed anchor next morning. Leonard Bacon was 23 at his inaugural sermon in 1825, the year after graduating from college and seminary. He paced the green in sleepless hours before he would preside. Daunted in his opening sermon, he said, "To be minister here, where my efforts ought to have an immediate and a mighty bearing on the triumph of the gospel through our land and through the world, oh, it is a fearful thing." Leonard first met Center Church when he entered Yale across the street as a sophomore, aged 15 in 1817. His fellow scholars were sons of ministers and substantial families and farm boys grown up with the church. To chapel at daybreak and then to hear what men had to say of Shakespeare and Francis Bacon, Hamlet and Julius Caesar, and life beyond the Bible. Who said what of destiny and how we treat one another? On late nights, friends came together in their rooms for ale and sweet potatoes. Caleb wrote a poem of dialogue between Dr. Silliman and the new theologian when they meet in paradise or purgatory, regarding what Jesus would say of electricity. They began a literary journal, The Talebearer, which ran for 30 issues. He walked the green after, his thoughts not ready to retire. Look up on a clear, cold night and see the creatures of the zodiac circle a world waiting to use and cherish us. At the center of the green, Leonard felt a balance, counterpoint to his steepled monument upslope. The embattled colony had repulsed the empire. Now proud and prosperous, New Haven was embattled with itself. Stocky and bearded in 1858, he heard again the rattle of musket fire as he stood and looked to his church for reassurance. The next section is called Discord. Leonard departed a repentant land and rowed his craft to a more forgiving shore. On landing, he had the devil of a time to calm the conflict in his church. A speaker against slavery, he felt ready to help this older flock find God's way out of the nation's original sin. They agreed slavery is sin, but divided on timing abolition and how closely to embrace black people. Leonard's wife Lucy saw the troubles in other parishes and held him up to confidence as he searched for footing. William Lloyd Garrison founded The Liberator in Boston on 1st of January 1831, which said slavery must be abolished now. Leonard Bacon urged moderation. Let the church mediate gradual emancipation. He believed Christian leadership could avert bloodshed, calm the conflict by speech and writing, words upon the waters. His books, Bacon on Slavery, sermons, articles, pressed for moderation against extreme emotion. Dissenting ripples in his throng sampled the swirl beyond the church. Discord over race and slavery erupted in 1831. William Lloyd Garrison, Arthur Tappan, and a group of blacks proposed the creation of a college for black males. In June of that year, the first Negro Convention, held in Philadelphia, pledged $20,000 to launch the institution. Referring to New Haven's friendly, pious, generous, and humane residents, its trade with the West Indies, and its literary and scientific character, the convention endorsed it as the site. The proposal frightened many whites by involvement of radical abolitionists, and who cared for the sensitivity of Southerners at Yale, the Southern market for New Haven products, and a college attracting more blacks to their community. Quote, a large number of white New Haveners held a mass meeting at which they condemned the proposal by a vote of 700 to 4, and declared that the college would be resisted by every lawful means. With their excitement stimulated by fiery speeches, an angry mob then shouted obscenities at blacks, stoned Tappan's home, which stood only a few doors from Bacon's residence. Leonard followed a moderating course and was embattled. Quote, Garrison, his harshest critic, charged in 1833 that nowhere in the United States, no slaveholder in the South has uttered or published more excusatory, corrupt, and blasphemous sentiments as regards slavery than Bacon. Bacon was deeply hurt and offended by a personal rebuke from the acerbic Elijah Wright, a childhood friend, who angrily exhorted him, quote, take my advice and come out like a man, like a true Christian, and confess your sin, with up and down honesty against everlasting hair-splitting and equivocation. Bacon clearly looked down on a man such as Garrison. In an 1833 article, he suggested that because Garrison, this is quoted, Garrison exhibited deficiencies in framing arguments and discussing principles, he should avoid controversy, employ his talents as a poet to advance the anti-slavery cause. Unquote. Bacon founded the Journal of Freedom in May 1834 for colonization. Then Garrison suggested it be named the Journal of Despotism. That was, colonization was to ship all the blacks back to Africa.
Oh.
In 1835, Bacon was the founder of the American Union for the Relief and Improvement of the Colored Race, for a middle ground through, quote, urgent gradualism. An active port in College Town, New Haven had its own community of a few hundred free blacks. Bacon sent his children to an integrated school in New Haven and urged other white families to do the same. But when action called to support the proposed college for African American males in New Haven, or school for black girls in Canterbury, 1833, he stood aside, retired to his study to write his way through the war of words. Try it out next Sunday. Hugh Davis was Leonard Bacon's biographer and noted, quote, "Perhaps after all, his response to these racial incidents indicates that he was unwilling to jeopardize his standing in Center Church by directly confronting the pervasive racist sentiment among white Americans, or by supporting institutions for black improvement that counted abolitionists among their active proponents." William Lloyd Garrison was not far from the mark, still quoted, of men such as Bacon. Garrison said, "They are polite men, they are cautious men, they are accommodating men, and they cherish a sacred horror of fanaticism and do not like irritation, and love to sail beneath a cloudless sky upon an unruffled stream." The next section is called John Brown. The parsonage was home to 6 children. Of Leonard and Lucy's, two remained in the household. Rebecca, 30, was their firstborn and continued well into adult life as right hand to her mother Lucy, and then stepmother Catherine after Lucy died in 1844. Rebecca managed the household and care of the younger children. Plain and with authority, she had the confidence and gratitude of Father Leonard. She was stern to make her own life possible. Edward Woolsey was 13 and still living at home. The other 4 surviving of Lucy and Leonard's 9 children were grown and out of the house. Leonard Bacon married Catherine Terry in 1847, and they had 4 children: Catherine, Ruddy, Alfred, and Ellen. Rebecca heard an insistent knock and hurried to the door. An apparition to put the devil in his place. Eyes of destiny. Was she in his way? Rebecca curtsied, bid him enter, and hastened to fetch her father. John Brown and Leonard found each other and double-clasped in reverent handshake. Leonard's hand on his shoulder, they entered the parson's study. The door closed on a current from the past. Carefree in the schoolyard, boyhood on the Ohio frontier, 2 lives were shared and then diverged. Brown, the driven wrath of God, and Bacon, beleaguered man of moderation. To keep the South in a birthing nation, the founders agreed to the 3/5 rule. Each slave added 3/5 of a person to the population represented in Congress by their masters. Political power tilted to give a Southern white minority power over the North. Cotton from forced labor was profitable and hungered for more land. Congress passed the Missouri Compromise in 1820, which set a fragile limit on the expansion of slavery. But the Compromise of 1850 repealed the Missouri Compromise, and its Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 imposed expansion of slavery by a white aristocracy in the South on an anti-slavery majority in the nation. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was opposed by a united clergy of thousands from the Northeast, with Bacon in the lead, delivering mass petition signatures to Congress. But Congress passed the act in May 1854, igniting slavery to sunder the nation. The act brought them back together, annealing the boyhood bond as John and Leonard saw outrage against God's will. The 1856 caning of Charles Sumner in the Senate chamber by a Southern congressman infuriated Northerners even more than distant Kansas, as Bacon and his friends saw it as a direct attack on freedom of speech and the Constitution. Leonard delivered keynote speeches at assemblies against the spread of slavery in Kansas. Quote, Rebecca expressed the hope that her father would not take the roof off. As he saw it, the Kansas depredations and the murderous assault on Sumner were mutually reinforcing. Resistance to these and other assaults of the slave interests were necessarily prerequisites, not only for a religious awakening, but, he implied, for something akin to a religious war that would, quote, purge the land of the guilt of oppression, unquote. He was confident, he noted in a stirring speech in October 1856, welcoming Governor Charles Robinson of Kansas, who was under federal indictment for refusing to acknowledge the legitimacy of the pro-slavery legislature, that God's law would ultimately vindicate right and justice in a struggle that might culminate in massive bloodshed. Bacon and other leading men in the community, quote, founded the Charles B. Lyons Colony, which initially consisted of 79 well-armed men. Bacon addressed several meetings in New Haven in early 1856 that raised funds, this is quoted, raised funds for people who had chosen to emigrate to Kansas but lacked weapons. At one of these meetings held in North Church, Henry Ward Beecher eloquently appealed for rifles for the Kansas settlers. Bacon fully agreed with Beecher's contention that the Free Soil forces had the right to arm themselves in self-defense, terming this, quote, legitimate Kansas work. Kansas appears to have deepened his frustration and rage, as well as his sense that Americans were engaged in a desperate struggle in which freedom, constitutional rights, and God's laws were at stake. Lincoln's predecessors had moved many of the nation's better weapons to arsenals in the South. When John Brown captured the arsenal at Harper's Ferry, October 19th, 1859, Leonard saw it as the act of a madman, but of one made mad by the outrage of Southern oppression, an act of providence. His assault on Harper's Ferry caused some to call him crazy, but many soon joined his purpose. John became hero and martyr and led them into Battle Hymn of the Republic. The last section is titled Reveille. Aunt Alice Mabel Bacon was born February 26, 1858, in the white clapboard house on Church Street, the last of Leonard's 14 children. She was a year and a half when Leonard's sister, her Aunt Delia, returned from England and to final sanctuary at the Hartford Retreat. Unmoved by slavery, when Delia died in September 1859, she yielded the family's center stage to parting of the country. Righteousness simmered north and south, dissolving clouds of doubt towards certainty of evil in the other. The Bacon household drifted toward action yesterday unthinkable. Not now, but soon, the men would take up uniform. Lincoln's election as president declared commitment of the North against slavery. Alice, who was like a year and a half, no, she was 3 by then. Alice felt excitement and dread from the grown-up holding her as she looked out the parsonage window at the regiment of 2nd Connecticut Volunteers when it was assembled and christened on the green. The Woolsey family of New York City were friends with the Bacons and shared letters. Georgiana Woolsey and her sister Eliza became nurses for the Union Army. They assembled a record after the war from letters that had been sent home. And their record begins, to quote, "In the spring of 1859, Abby not having been very well during the winter, Mother planned a little trip to the South for her benefit, making up a party with Robert, Mary, and little Mary. They spent several days in Charleston and vexed their righteous souls with the sights and sounds of an auction of slaves." So,
Oh, Bob, what? You made it so real for us.
good.
It just, I couldn't take my eyes off of you, and I couldn't take my ears off the story.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. That phrase, urgent gradualism.
Well, that was, these people were all conflicted, including within themselves.
Yes.
And then, it took something really outrageous to finally stand up and do something.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Bob, I would love to have a meeting with you, so maybe we could get some hard copies of what you've been reading. Would that be possible?
I'd be delighted.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
All right.
Wonderful.
That's it. I got it.
Okay. And here we have our second reader, our second writer-reader. This is Lou Templeton. And Lou, I did talk to you a little earlier about mentioning maybe one or two favorite writers. Tell us about this.
Flannery O'Connor. When I was in college, I had a course in literature, and this was my book. And she is probably the best short story writer who has ever lived. And I still dip back into it once in a while and read her stories because they were about people she knew.
Okay.
And that's a good way to look at it when you start writing, because when I wrote this, I really am writing about experiences.
Yes.
And people, and I know this woman I'm really talking about. So,
great, Lou. I'll look forward to Flannery O'Connor. I somehow missed that writer. So.
yeah, she's really
Okay.
good. Okay, we're ready to go?
Glad you're here and we're listening.
This is so different from what you just heard, so I hope you're patient with me. This is the kind of stories I write. And this is called Riverboat Romance. My father walked out on my mother when I was 3 years old. I don't remember him, of course, but my mother made sure I grew up knowing he was not a good man. When I was older, I figured he must not have been all bad, because evidently he put some money in the bank. We always had money to spend. Still, as an adult, I feel so uncomfortable around men. When meeting a guy, I am always cautious before I accept him as a friend. Remembering those early years, I wish my mother had explained truthfully why I didn't have a father. There were times when kids asked me why I didn't have a daddy. I don't recall how I answered, but my mother suggested that I just say, he died. I asked her if that's what really happened, and she said something I didn't understand at the time. Eventually I understood why she told me to lie. His leaving us was the same as death to her and to me. But mostly I have happy memories of a safe, comfortable life with my mother. I don't remember ever needing anything. I don't remember feeling poor, although my mother didn't have a job. When I was old enough to ask where the money came from, she explained it as being a settlement. We often joined vacation trips with people from church, and my mother always dressed in the latest styles. She had a standing weekly appointment at the beauty shop. We lived comfortably. Yes, I suppose you could say I enjoyed a happy, comfortable life as a child. I do, however, remember my mother constantly complaining about men. Even when the kind old neighbor brought vegetables from his garden, my mother scoffed and grumbled about the old fella. She said he was up to something. I didn't know what she was talking about. Up to something? That was before I knew about sex. I remember how she often mentioned the silly girls who were boy crazy. When my girlfriends were dating, I ignored the boys when they were friendly, because I knew my mother would have a fit and would not approve of my having boyfriends. She never let me forget a girl in high school who had to marry her boyfriend because she was pregnant. As I think about it now, my mother's contempt for men must have affected me more than I realized. I grew up believing men are not to be trusted. Over the years, I was aware of boys at school and at college, but I ignored them. I left them alone, and they left me alone. When I graduated from high school, I applied and was accepted in a nearby college. Mother arranged transportation for me with a woman in our church who worked at the college. I continued living at home, and when I finished college, I became a third-grade teacher back in the school I attended. I lived at home with my mother until she died. I have continued living in that same house I have lived my whole life. Over the years, I suppose I have become a respected old maid grade teacher. I feel appreciated by the children I teach and by their parents, whom I also taught. Wherever I go in town, I hear somebody calling Miss Rose, the name everybody in town knows me by. I plan to retire in a couple of years and do some traveling. School enrollment has gradually increased, and another third-grade teacher joined the staff this year. I was delighted, but a little concerned because Kathy, the new teacher, I just wasn't sure she would fit in. She is young, very young, and newly graduated from college. Still, to my surprise, she and I have become friends, and my life has taken an unexpected, pleasant turn. Kathy and I get along well. I secretly imagine her as a little sister. She is the opposite. She is optimistic about everything. She's always smiling, always ready to help. In her presence, I find myself smiling too. I am pleased when she asks me for advice, and she seems to appreciate the advice I give to her. This year has been one of the most pleasant years I have ever taught. When summer vacation came, Kathy even suggested we take a trip together. I turned her down and thought that was the last of it because I had no desire to travel. In fact, I remembered how much trouble it was just getting ready for a trip. Kathy didn't accept my negative response. She was young and longing to see more of the world. She had a collection of travel brochures, which she urged me, please just take a look, Rose. It occurred to me that she would never travel, and had never traveled, and would be uncomfortable traveling on her own, or even joining a travel group with people she didn't know. The more I thought about it, she would probably never travel unless she had somebody to go with her. Maybe I should think about it. I looked at the travel brochures she gave me, and a 6-day Danube River cruise was the only trip that mildly interested me. Soak up the soothing steam at a Budapest thermal bath. Learn to waltz at a Vienna dance school. Savor Austro-Hungarian cuisine in Vienna and Budapest. Admire the Wachau Valley's beauty. explore lesser-known Central European cities like Bratislava and Passau, witness daily life in an abbey on an exclusive visit to Godvig. All that in 6 days? Wow. I checked my bank account and called John Willis, a friend from church who worked at the bank. I told him about the trip. I told him how much it would cost, and I asked him what he thought about me spending that much money for a vacation. "Oh, go for it, Rose," John Willis said. Didn't you enjoy those trips you and your mama made while you were growing up? You have the funds, and you know your mama would want you to go. John Willis was right. Mother would want me to go. I remembered how much we enjoyed those trips she and I took before she died. Oh, how we enjoyed the new, unusual cuisines we tried. I could imagine her urging me to go. I could just hear her saying, "Take the leap, my darling, and enjoy yourself while you can." I called Kathy. She was thrilled. We checked our calendars, agreed on a date, and Kathy made the reservations before I could back out. Thus, the countdown began for a 6-day Danube River vacation. I think my vacation became the talk of the town. Everybody at church knew about the trip I planned. Lola, a divorcee who was a stylish dresser, volunteered to help me purchase the clothes she said I must have for the trip. I ended up with clothing I never would have otherwise purchased. Lola also said I needed a new hairstyle. She accompanied me to the beauty salon and oversaw a new short bob, which she said made me look 10 years younger. Word got around. I would meet people on the street. Even strangers would say, "Heard about your trip, Rose. Happy traveling." I couldn't believe what I was doing. To be honest, I was experiencing a sense of joy I had not felt in years. I felt truly alive again. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw an attractive middle-aged woman smiling at me. I suddenly laughed out loud and said to my image, "Where have you been hiding all these years?" When departure day finally arrived, Kathy and I were high as kites. Even the long flight to Budapest sounded like fun. On arrival in Budapest, Kathy and I were weary but still excited as we checked into a luxury hotel we had booked online. I was pleased to see twin beds. I had never slept with anyone except my mother. When I told Kathy, she said she didn't believe it. I could tell she wanted to say something else but had second thoughts. She probably was feeling sorry for me. We slept well despite the time difference in Budapest and back home. We had a late breakfast, checked out, took a taxi to the address printed on the travel documents, and there we boarded Riverboat Second Wind for our first evening on board. Second Wind, we found, was true to the brochure description. It was truly a floating luxury hotel. Our cabin had a huge window that would give us an unbelievable view. We unpacked. Kathy took a little nap, and I looked over the itinerary. The first item was welcome cocktails with the crew at 5. At 5, Kathy and I joined the crew for cocktails, clad in dinner clothes that we had purchased specifically for the trip. As we were chatting about the suburban surroundings of our luxury hotel, an elderly gentleman standing nearby introduced himself. He said his name was Tom, and he immediately initiated a conversation. He was obviously a seasoned traveler and praised us for choosing this particular riverboat cruise company. "Ladies, you will not be disappointed," Tom said. I have traveled this company many times and never been disappointed. We chatted until the dining room opened, at which time another gentleman joined Tom. "Ah, perhaps you ladies will join Rick and me for dinner," Tom suggested. Kathy looked at me and must have seen I was frowning. Obviously, the guys were gay. But Kathy smiled sweetly and said, "Of course we'll join you." A few minutes later, we were seated with Tom and Rick and learned they had just met a few minutes earlier. I chided myself for jumping to the conclusion that they were gay. We learned that Tom, a retired businessman, was an avid gambler and usually chose ocean liners that had gaming. Tom said his son purchased this trip for him, and he laughed. He said his son made sure there was no gaming on board. Tom said since there was no gaming on board, he was actually looking forward to the fantastic tours that were scheduled. Kathy introduced us, saying we were teacher colleagues and were not into gaming at all. Rick, smiling broadly, said he was also an educator and not much of a gambler either. "I gambled a little after my wife died to pass the time," he said. "Eventually I pulled myself out of the dumps and now I'm seeing a part of the world I haven't seen before." Kathy was beaming and I was remembering my mother's advice about men. Rick was too handsome and looked too good to be true. I'd have to have a talk with Kathy. After dinner, Rick invited Kathy and me to join him to check out the deck. He said the captain had recommended seeing the scenic lights along the river. Seemed a bit cool, so I said I wasn't dressed for outside weather, but Kathy said she would join him and let me know if it was too cold outside. When she came in from the deck, she said the weather was fine and suggested I take a quick look while Rick was still there. She reminded me that Rick had said he was a teacher. Maybe you and Rick can chat about what classes you taught. I didn't comment, but I remember that Rick had used the word educator, a term I would never use about myself as a classroom teacher. He seemed pompous to me. I figured he was something other than a teacher. Anyway, I felt he was not quite right about Rick. I didn't go out on the deck as Kathy suggested. The second day, Kathy and I joined the Budapest tour, and sometime during the day I realized Kathy and Rick were missing from the tour. When I questioned the tour director, she said Kathy had a headache, and Rick had volunteered to accompany her back to the boat. When I questioned Kathy later, she laughed and said they had found something more interesting to do. I didn't like her answer. The third morning we awoke, realized we were cruising down the Danube to Vienna. The whole day was spent relaxing and reviewing the scenery as we drifted leisurely down the river. Since we would have an overnight in Vienna, Kathy and I planned to take advantage of an outdoor concert that evening that was free. We were pleased with our decision. The concert was beautiful. It was all Mozart. And during the concert, Tom and Rick joined us and escorted us back to the boat. The fourth day, a horse-drawn carriage tour through Vienna was planned. Tom and Rick called up with us after breakfast and asked if they could join us. Of course, we were delighted. The shop at Schönbrunn Palace, however, almost ruined the vacation for me. During the tour, we were given time to shop in an elegant gift shop. Kathy purchased an overly priced bookmark, and I purchased an overly priced postcard. We hurried to the ladies' room since there would be no more stops during the tour. I left the ladies' room before Kathy, so I joined Tom and Rick at the gift shop. The salesperson was returning their credit cards, which I noticed were premium cards. I wasn't surprised that Tom had a platinum, but I was surprised to see Rick with a platinum. He was a teacher. He obviously had some income in addition to his teaching salary. I couldn't afford a platinum. The more I thought about it, the more concerned I felt about Rick. He didn't fit the image of any male teacher I had ever known over the years. From the beginning, I could not imagine him standing up in a classroom with chalk dust on the cuff of his shirt. Also, he was much too hesitant to talk about himself. When questioned, he always changed the subject. When I asked what subjects he taught, he actually stuttered and said, math. I was not comfortable with this guy. For all I knew, he could be a criminal with ill-gotten money. His name sounded Italian to me. Isn't the mafia Italian? He had shared little about himself, and as I said, he didn't fit any image of a male classroom teacher I had ever known. I kept remembering the reason I joined Kathy on this trip. She had never traveled before and had been nervous about traveling. I decided to talk to her and suggest that she let this friendship with Rick cool down a bit. She was obviously smitten and would not want to hear anything negative about him. The lovely trip was taking an unpleasant turn. I took a shower and downed 2 Advils. When Kathy came in, I was in bed reading a magazine I'd picked up from the Riverboat Library. I asked her if she remembered Rick's last name. It was something Italian. I think it was Marino. Yeah, she said. Why do you ask anyway? Kathy, please don't think I'm prying, I said, but there is something not quite right about Rick. I'm worried about your friendship with him. Please tell me what's going on with you and Rick. Rose, she said, I know you don't have much confidence in me, but I am an adult after all. It's one thing for you to look over my shoulder while we're team teaching back home, but this trip, you are not my chaperone, for God's sake. Her response devastated me. The 5th day is a blur. I could not stop thinking about how innocent Kathy was. She had attended a small teacher's college, took a job in our hometown, and still lived with her parents. We teachers often remarked how childlike she was. Now she was being wooed by a worldly sort of fellow who might be a gangster. I decided then that I should talk to her and warn her about strangers. Especially handsome fellas who take advantage of unsuspecting beautiful women like her. I never had the chance. Kathy was always with Rick. I remember a little of Lynn's or the drive to Salzburg. I don't remember the guided tour in Old Town and Mozart's birthplace, but I do remember Kathy was always with Rick, and I was a wreck by the time we arrived back to Riverboat Second Wind. Kathy hurriedly dressed for dinner and left before I had a chance to talk to her about Rick. I went to bed instead of attending the gala dinner on the boat that evening. Kathy came in sometime long after I had turned in. When I woke the following morning, Kathy and her bags were gone. I finished packing, hurried to the dining room, and as I entered, Kathy was leaving the dining room and she waved at me. While having breakfast, Tom joined me and I told him about my concern for Kathy. He said I was overreacting, which upset me. After breakfast, I disembarked and saw the representative of the airline that would take Kathy and me back home. Kathy was nowhere to be seen. No way was I going to look for her and jeopardize my flight back home. To be honest, I was weary looking after Kathy. This was the last time I would travel with her. I felt bad about her missing her flight back home, but it wasn't my concern. When school started the following month, Kathy wasn't there. When I inquired, the principal said Kathy's mother had called and said Kathy had moved up north. I was shocked. I immediately thought of Rick and his platinum credit card, backed by mafia money. What kind of life would Kathy have with a guy who was connected to the mafia? I called her mother as soon as I could. What's this about Kathy moving north? Where up north did she move? I'm not sure, Kathy's mother said. I think it's in New York City. It's wherever Harvard University is.
Oh, you took us for a ride. What a good ride that was.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lou.
I actually did take a riverboat cruise.
Oh, keep writing, keep writing. Oh, you just made it so believable. And see you next time for Writers Read. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.